All right. Well, welcome everyone to this webinar that's sponsored by BMES. I'm Ian Schneider. I'm an associate professor at Iowa State University in Chemical and Biological Engineering, and I chair the Student Affairs Subcommittee. And with me, I'll introduce the panel in a little bit. Also helping out, and she's been a tremendous help, is Caitlin Bache, and so she's going to is from BMES and is going to help kind of cue some of the questions, as well as Laura Hansen, who is actually I'll throw it to you, Laura, too, when we go around for the panel, and you can introduce yourself as well. She'll be kind of my moderator here on the panel. So basically, this panel is a discussion on kind of exploring the opportunities, the appropriateness, as well as the effective use of AI, probably with a focus on large language models, but it could potentially be broader than that in the context of education and maybe more focused context of biomedical engineering education. And so the Student Affairs Subcommittee was really interested in forming this webinar. There's been, with the advent of OpenAI's ChatGPT, which came in November 2022, I think it's really impacted engineering education overall. And I think as educators, we're trying to figure some things out. I think also on the student end, students are trying to figure things out as well. There have been a lot of questions that I've received from students as far as, what are some of the issues, maybe the professional or ethical issues associated with using AI, but also how can it help them in learning their material and becoming practicing biomedical engineers. And I think from the faculty standpoint, there's kind of a lot of questions associated with those as well. How can we use these tools to help students learn material better? And so that's going to be the focus of the talk. So the panel today is really kind of a combination of, we have some, philosophers, ethicists, biomedical engineering educators, people interested in policy, and so hopefully a good mix of panelists that can answer some questions that some pressing questions that are on the minds of students, particularly in the Biomedical Engineering Society. So at this point, I'm going to let the panelists just kind of introduce themselves. So I'll throw it over to a panelist member, and maybe you can introduce yourself. I'll start with the co-moderator here, Laura Hansen. So maybe you can introduce yourself, Laura.
Yep. Hello, I'm Laura Hansen. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University in the Division of Cardiology, but I'm also an adjunct faculty member of the BME graduate program, joint between Georgia Tech and Emory University. And my background is in biomedical engineering. I did my PhD at Georgia Tech, and and I don't have much use with AI, but I'm excited to learn alongside all of the people attending.
Greg Robson, maybe you could give a quick introduction.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining, and a big thanks to Professor Schneider for putting this event together. Really, I think it's a great idea. I'm a philosopher by training. I focus on ethics, and I'm a student of societies, so I'm really interested in AI, and I'm wondering whether we are right now possibly in the next technological revolution.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Justin Biddle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Justin Biddle. I was also trained as a philosopher, but I teach in the School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech. Also direct the Ethics, Technology, and Human Interaction Center there, and am the sort of ethics co-lead on a couple of large AI-related projects at Georgia Tech, the Georgia Artificial Intelligence and Manufacturing Corridor, and the National AI Institute on Advances and Optimization, and generally really interested in questions around AI ethics and governance. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Reem Koja.
Hi, my name is Dream Kocha. I'm in the Faculty of Bioengineering at University of California, San Diego. I think thank you so much for arranging this meeting. I think we cannot all just revamp our courses to accommodate AI in one quarter. We just need really to reach out to the community and figure this out together. So thank you so much, and I'm really excited to learn from my colleagues today.
Alexandra Worth.
Hello. And yeah, thank you so much for organizing this. I'm excited for the conversation. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell University in biomedical engineering. I was trained as an engineer, but as a postdoc, I switched into education research. So my focus of my research is on how we teach biomedical engineers and how they learn. And I'm particularly interested in using AI and large language models, both to do my education research, but also looking at how we need to change our educational system to adapt to these new technologies and train the next best generation of biomedical engineers.
Great. And Steve Strain.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Steve Strain, assistant professor of teaching at the University of Memphis. I teach undergraduate required courses in biomedical engineering, and I'm particularly interested in how AI can be used to enhance teaching and learning, how it's going to affect the job market, what skills our graduates will need in the job market, and how it's going to impact the institution and society. I think it's going to be very disruptive, and I believe that if we wait and don't try to get ready for the disruption, then it could be bad. But if we do, it could be an opportunity, and hopefully we could ride the wave. So that's what I'm lobbying for at my institution, and not that successfully just yet, but so far the wave hasn't crashed, so it's not too late.
Great. So we're going to start off just with some kind of pre-prepared questions. I would invite the webinar, the attendees to, if they're interested in the question, I think there's a Q&A button at the bottom. I think that's the only thing that's active for them. There might be a chat, but I'm pretty sure there's a Q&A. So if you want to submit a question, please do, and we'll have some of the moderator and Caitlin will be kind of looking at that queue. So let's start off just with a couple of questions associated with kind of your view currently on kind of the effectiveness or the ways in which AI and large language models can be effective in teaching and learning. So what are some ways that AI and large language models are beneficial for learning? We'll maybe start with that question. Steve, do you want to kind of jump in there?
Well, I believe that they can be effectively used to learn new topics. I'm not sure the knowledge is where it needs to be for all topics, but in many cases, for instance, if I ask it to explain a piece of code to me, a programming code, it often does a fairly good job of doing that. And so I think asking for explanations could be useful. I've also found it helpful for summarizing and for writing or understanding a large amount or trying to process something like a 45-minute video, quickly get the feel for it. I've been able to paste in transcripts and get a nice summary without. And I believe there's many other uses, but those are just a couple of examples that I can think of off the top of my head.
Great, Greg.
Yeah, so another use of AI in the classroom is as really a first approximation for learning. So typically, I don't want students to consult AI straight away. I like them, since I teach philosophy, I'm a philosophy teacher at Notre Dame in the School of Business. I like students to really grapple with the texts first. But one thing that can be done is you can say to a student, Raise a question in ChatGPT and then tell me what's wrong with the answer. Tell me the strengths and the weaknesses. What's missing that should be there? What's there but shouldn't be characterized in the way in which it's characterized? And in that sense, students can see AI to some extent as a dialogue partner. It can be a constructive conversation partner. But at this point, at least, I think, at least in philosophy, it's never the final word.
Alex, did you want to?
I can add to that too. I mean, these sorts of machine learning in education has been around for a while. And I think that its real strength is in the ability to personalize our education. And so I think that those were just two examples of ways of how we can use these tools to get real-time feedback, to practice and learning new things in a way at your pace, in a way that works for you at that moment, and that is motivating for you as an individual. So really this ability to all of a sudden personalize material and ways of learning, I think, is extremely powerful and something that large language models will really enable. On the same time, the other side of this too is, I think about the faculty and instruction side, like the difference between what we see in K-12. Typically, you might have classes of 20 students, but in higher ed, you have classes of 200 or 500 students. How do you deal with personalization of this material at such a scale? It's really challenging. And so I think that this can enable it. It can also enable things like better or more interesting assessments, faster assessments, taking down a lot of those repetitive tasks that faculty are constantly having to do that occupy a lot of time, and allowing them to put the time into other things like giving feedback or making new materials or changing their curriculum. So I think that there's a lot of different approaches and opportunities for this to transform higher education.
So maybe, we've outlined several kind of potential opportunities for AI and large language models to kind of impact how students learn and some ways in which students can use those. So I think the second question is like the flip side of that, which is, are there challenges with incorporating AI? Are there instances where it might hinder learning that we want to talk a little bit about? Reem, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would like to connect it also with the previous question. So there's Professor Eric Klopfer from MIT did this super interesting experiment in his class. So he gave a programming language to 3 groups of students, but none of them knew the code, how to code it in that new language. So he asked group 1 to use ChatGPT, group 2 to use Llama, and group 3 can only use Google to solve this assignment. And the ChatGPT group, the Llama group, were the first to finish the task quickly, but the Google group took the longest because they had to break down the problem. But then came in the real test. Professor Klopfer asked the same groups to solve the same question, but this time they have to use their memory to solve it. And guess what? Like every single group from the ChatGPT group did not pass the test. They couldn't remember a thing. Half the Llama group passed the test, but every single student who used Google passed this test. So I think this is how we can see that AI can be, as you mentioned, like a great assistant, but it really should not replace the process of critical thinking. So this is, I think, where it really hinders students' ability.
Yeah, Steve, did you want to?
Yeah, Reem, thank you for that. That's a great example, and I'd love if that study is published, I'd love to get a citation for it. It does remind me of some research I've seen on learning that compares retrieval practice to other forms of learning, and in particular, the long-term memory versus working memory effect. It seems to me that that's a good case where the groups that were doing it with ChatGPT and Llama were using their working memory, but it wasn't requiring them to do anything that would make it into long-term memory. And so I think being very thoughtful about it may be possible to give prompts that at some point. Right now, I haven't found ideal ones, but prompts that do require retrieval memory in the learning process rather than just giving the students the answer. I think it's possible in practice, but I don't think I haven't seen anything that will avoid the effect that Reem mentioned yet.
Yeah, Justin, did you want to?
Yeah, I think one of the real tricks moving forward is going to be able to figure out ways of sort of outsourcing some thinking to large language models, but doing it in a way that still facilitates our abilities to become expert reasoners and critical thinkers. I mean, to become an expert thinker, you have to practice, you have to struggle, you have to fight through problems, you have to demonstrate intellectual perseverance. And just like, to become an expert athlete or musician, you have to practice and struggle. And the same is true with thinking. And so how do we kind of leverage these tools that really have the capabilities to take over a lot of that thinking for us, but to do it in ways that we still kind of build the capacities that we want to build in ourselves, is a really difficult problem. I'll note also, sort of going in a different direction, there are, of course, sort of well-known problems of bias with regard to any kind of machine learning system. And so we have to keep in mind that when we're dealing with outputs of any machine learning system, including large language models, they have these that their training data has. And so if we've got large language models that are trained largely on sort of English language sources and the internet and sort of Reddit and whatever else they're trained on, that's what they're gonna that's what's structure their outputs. And sometimes that's hard to see from just, if you're just on the other side of the screen getting outputs from a large language model, it's hard to know exactly. So, what are the biases implicit in the system, and how is that impacting the kinds of results that I'm getting and the kinds of results that I'm not? So these are a couple of, I think, challenges that we've got moving forward.
Greg, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd just like to really echo some of the comments from my collaborator in technology ethics, Justin. So I think that a couple of points bear really re-emphasis. One is that the large language models are trained and there's no view from nowhere. So the training has to start with some substantive commitments to different views and different ways of thinking, so views and methods or procedures. And so this should give students reason to take the results of AI. So what ChatGPT gives you, for example, the text you get, with a grain of salt. It's good to be maybe, at best, cautiously optimistic that you're going to get a true view of the world if you're looking at controversial topics, for example. But also with really dense, nuanced, difficult texts in bioengineering, biomedical engineering, many different fields, in philosophy, and the great works of Plato and Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas, for example. These are really difficult texts, okay? So to just sort of, again, to echo what Professor Biddle said, these are texts that students really need to grapple with themselves. It's important to try to make sense of the text on your own. And in that way, you come to sort of own the material. You incorporate it in your own thinking. Very different from taking the results of generated content as the truth and then just memorizing it and moving on. So I'd encourage students really to grapple with the text themselves.
So one thing that kind of came up and that I want to throw back to everyone just from the discussion here is, and I think Justin had mentioned this kind of outsourcing of some, but not all. This Alex talked about this as well. I think from a student standpoint, I think the question becomes, am I going to get that kind of guidance from the instructor as far as how I need to use these? Is that the expectation, or should the instructor be really clear on kind of modes, in which you're using AI and large language models? So I don't know if anyone has a kind of a comment on that specifically. I think that would really help students to know, like, is this on them? Is should the instructor be kind of talking about this? How do they work through that question of what they should outsource and what they shouldn't? Steve, do you want to comment?
Yeah, a helpful concept for me in this kind of situation is AI literacy, and I don't think there's really a mature curriculum or anything by which faculty could teach students in a way that was kind of uniform across the departments and the colleges in a university, for example. There are several AI literacy models, and I've only really looked at one in detail from Georgia Tech. But one component of that, most of the questions that we've discussed so far are encompassed in an AI literacy model, the ethics, and then one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the way that they work. I think those of us who've got some history with machine learning understand, but many students do not. The models are not thinking. They don't have a goal of finding a correct answer. They are simply generating words according to a probability distribution that's highly sensitive to context. And so they're really not trying to find the truth. They're trying to find a likely a response that has a high probability of occurring. And so I did have a little honors forum in the spring with some students to kind of go through the elements of AI literacy and explore that. But I find it difficult when there's not kind of a community really working on these questions. And so right now, I kind of think it's a free-for-all. I want to help the students and, as well as I can. But I think so far there's not enough consensus on what AI literacy means and what's needed in terms of mastery of the concepts.
Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, I can build off that a bit. I think that what is our responsibility as an instructor? Well, it's to define the learning goals that we have for our students. And we need to be I think that we now more than ever need to be very careful about what are our goals? When are we teaching them in the curriculum? What things could we say, hey, I don't think this is as important anymore. So maybe I'm going to focus on this other thing even more. Or no, this is an intro class and I want students to go through those fundamental texts or derive that fundamental equation because this is really important learning to build that understanding of how some system works for the future. And I think that it's on us to not necessarily teach how to use AI, although that's sort of a collective thing at the university, but for an individual biomedical engineering faculty, I think what it is on us is to be aware that students are using these tools to try to circumvent learning because they have a lot of classes, they have a lot of pressure, they want to get an A, and they don't necessarily see the long-term outcomes of using these tools to circumvent learning, and changing the way that we teach so that if, for example, something could be answered with ChatGPT quite easily, but we still want students to go through the process of learning that, maybe that now needs to happen inside the classroom. And we've seen similar things with, take-home exams and being able to look things up on Google previously. And now we have to change the methods of where we teach, how we teach, and when we teach. So I think that it is on us to be aware, at least, that these tools are being used.
Justin, did you want to?
Yeah, I think it's on us to be aware, and it's also on us to give clear guidance to students. I mean, this is a technology that is really disrupting education in different ways, and we're all kind of struggling with how to move forward with this. And so we need to be communicating with our students about this in ways that are really clear. I don't know how to do this completely. So, I mean, one thing that I'm going to do later this semester is my students have a big project coming up toward the end of the semester. So I'm going to take a class period where we read some sample guidelines about appropriate and inappropriate use of large language models. I'm going to have them draft a policy, and we're going to talk about it together and hopefully agree about a policy that will bind them for that project. But so I think clear communication is really important. And one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because although I know a fair amount about large language models from a kind of theoretical perspective, my students use these tools more than I do. And so I think that I should be listening to them as well.
So yeah, there's a few questions that are coming in here, and I want to kind of come to some of them. I think we've already, Alex and Justin just now have already kind of talked a little bit about how do you structure things so that it's more difficult for students to kind of circumvent the aspects of the course that are actually allowing them to learn through AI. And so one of these is kind of doing more kind of in-class, assessment or whatever, as well as kind of like refocusing on kind of policies and maybe increasing the view of kind of honor, but also efficacious learning. So are there any other ways that people have used to kind of like inhibit kind of circumventing of this, like taking the easy way out and just kind of using AI as to get the answer or whatever? Reem, can you comment on that?
Oh, I'm a big advocate for analog teaching, like in the board, in-class assignments. I think they work best. And one of the studies I made, actually, I saw so I did a correlation study between the in-class assignments and homeworks. And I found that in-class assignments correlate highly, and even better, to the student performance in class, and homework actually correlated negatively to student performance in class. So this actually, if we were talking about pre-ChatGPT, that might not be related, but post-ChatGPT, this actually, you're only going to see a lot of homework unless we as instructors, we just revamp them in a way to, as Alexandra mentioned or Professor Worth mentioned, that we have just to find ways to make these assignments, not at least AI proof, in my opinion.
Justin, did you want to come?
For smaller classes, I have students do projects where they are responsible not just for presenting material that they learn, but also responding to questions. So kind of simulating sort of conference type formats where they give a presentation, but then there's a Q&A period and they have to be able to respond on the fly to critical questions about what it is, what the research that they've done, what it is that they've presented. I think that can be helpful.
I think another question that's kind of coming in is has to do with referencing, and I think there's like a kind of an ethics question here, like what, how much of kind of an AI or information from large language models is in kind of the writing or the solution, and like how do you reference that? I think given that kind of traditionally it's difficult to get students to reference anything. Now it's almost like they have to reference something, but they even need to maybe describe with a lot more detail the way in which they used it. So I don't know if anyone has done this in their classes as far as like requiring that kind of referencing, or is there a way to kind of coach students on how to properly reference this material? Justin, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's good to disclose. I think the use of generative AI if one is using it. So having a statement where you say exactly what you used it for. So you might use it for sort of for grammatical purposes, or maybe sort of early stage brainstorming or something like this. Having a statement where you're just disclosing how you're using it and how you're not using it can be helpful. It shouldn't be referenced, though, in the sense of like ChatGPT is not an author, and so no one should be quoting ChatGPT as a source. Authors are entities that are responsible for the material that they are presenting, and ChatGPT is not that. So I think disclosure is good, but referencing in the way that we reference other authors is, I think, something to be avoided.
That's a great point. Greg?
Yeah, so on this, there are principles of disclosure, of transparency, of non-deception. When in doubt, I would say students should speak with their instructors if they have questions about whether they can use AI, how to use AI, so how far they're able to use it permissibly, if at all. So it would be a mistake, ethically speaking, I think, to use AI and then in any way pawn AI off as one's own work. That should never be done. There are also often instructors will have specific statements on AI in their syllabi, so students should look for those in syllabi. But if they're not in a course's syllabus, I think it's still important, if one's using AI at all, that there are clear expectations around that instructors have for students and that students are looking out for, so that they can make the whole process fully transparent.
I think we're getting a couple questions here that kind of are moving from maybe undergraduate or students into kind of graduate students. And so some of the questions are with respect to research. How do I kind of the appropriateness associated with using large language models? It shouldn't be referenced. It should be disclosed as a tool. But maybe there's some ways in which we could describe how that's currently being used and what's kind of maybe appropriate with respect to maybe graduate student education. I don't know if anyone wants to chime in there.
I can speak briefly. I saw one of the questions was about using it as a reference tool. I mean, there are a lot of AI tools out there already for that, something like Cite, but they'll just continue to grow and hopefully get better, so that things like doing literature review can happen quicker, which would be a great resource to have. I have looked at some of these tools, and so far they don't do a very good job. And so personally, I would caution from using them without going through. I mean, it's a base to help explore new literature and things like that, but I would still read read the paper, read the abstract, understand before you go and cite it in your work, because a lot of the recommendations that have been given don't make sense for the context. And I worry for publications and for my students, use these tools because I want you to do the best work possible. I want you to write in a tone that is professional. And if this tool can help you do that better, please use it. But don't let this, again, like, you need to read every single word that is on that paper before you hand it to me or submit it someplace. You need to know every single one of these citations and what you're citing. And you can't use this to just replace that process entirely.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, and I'm going to jump in maybe and say something as a panelist, even though I'm moderating here, but one of the things that I've noticed just with respect, it does do a nice job with summarizing. However, the implicit kind of assumption there is that the interpretation within the paper is correct with respect to the data. And so at some point, right, like there's misinterpretation within the data or kind of complex interpretation that is kind of described in a particular way in a paper. And I think that becomes really problematic too, because these models are not sophisticated enough to be able to take kind of multi-inputs, so like words, but also figures and schematics and images, and kind of integrate that into one kind of summary. And so I think that's the other kind of challenge associated with graduate education, particularly using this in the context of research. So we're getting some questions on like focus on writing assignments specifically. Like how, this seems to be an area from an instructor standpoint of kind of like how do you manage or account for these? Is there a way to do this, or is it does it ultimately just kind of fall back on, oral exams or kind of one-on-one interactions for assessments and pulling away from writing? I don't know if anyone can kind of comment on that. So this can be writing in the context, I think, of, even like lab reports or, design reports or just kind of essay questions or assignments. Is there any way to verify that?
Repeat the question, Ian.
So the question is how do you, if it's your desire to kind of ensure that they're learning how to write appropriately, kind of, and using their own critical thinking skills, how do you do that in kind of a traditional format, or can you not? Is that just kind of gone?
May I? I'll take a crack. I'll take first crack. I think there's always been a question of trust in the learning process on the part of the student and on the part of the teacher. And I do think that AI is going to change how we negotiate that trust. Some students do want to learn, and I think I've got to try to help to be helpful to those students. There are students who are going to try to bypass the process, and I want to do what I can to not enable them, but I can't be a police officer. It is really getting hard to detect AI product as AI generated rather than human generated, and I think it's eventually going to become impossible. However, I think things of the sort that Reem mentioned, of having in-class activities that require thinking, is going to it's going to become more important. Probably the whole I guess, relative usefulness of different learning techniques is going to be different. And I can't exactly predict how, but I do believe Reem is right when she talks about in-class activities, and other panelists have suggested it as well.
Justin, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I think that, and again, this is, I don't have answers for how to do this, but I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to do writing assignments where it's just you give them an assignment, they write something, they turn it in, you grade it, done. That's going to be very difficult to do, I think, in the future. But if we writing assignments that are somehow built into a longer learning process, a dialogical process where we have them write something and then we ask them questions about it and have them respond to it, or have a kind of scaffolded assignment where we give them, we have them write the first part of a paper and then we give them feedback and then they have to take that feedback into account and build on that or something like that. Those kinds of things might be more manageable and better ways to go. But those are hard to do in big classes.
Reem, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I just remembered, like, I think 5 years ago, there was an idea of flipped classroom. Do you remember that? And I think AI is kind of pushing this to be necessary right now. So I just want to share this thought that maybe writing can be just broken into small tasks. For example, hey, in class, just grab a pen and paper. What would the outline be? What are the resources or journals that you're going to look for? So something similar to this.
Greg, did you want to comment?
I don't have a ready answer, really. I'd say it's impossible, though, to predict with precision just what will happen 5, 10 years from now with AI and markets. But it's quite possible that given a massive demand by instructors around the world for better deploying AI, better detecting illicit uses of AI in the classroom and outside of the classroom, that markets and businesses will give rise to innovations that maybe using AI itself will help to ensure that AI is put to good use.
So maybe we could, pivot. We've been kind of talking a little bit about ethical kind of considerations associated with this, but I think this is kind of coming up in some of the questions and some of our discussion too, with respect to where the data comes from, and then incorporating new data into the model based on prompts. And so maybe we could have a discussion about the ethical considerations related to LLMs, particularly in the context of confidential information versus public information. And then maybe also we talked a little bit about this idea that, right, large language models are not an author. They should be referenced in the same way. My sense is then plagiarism does not work in that kind of mode, but there is still integrity issues associated with it. And that kind of cuts through like confidentiality too, providing like putting data out there. So what are some of these kind of ethical considerations with respect to confidential versus public documents and what comes along with that? Greg, did you want to comment?
Yeah, one thing I'll say on this is that there are rights and duties that attach to different memberships and social groups. So whether it's a private organization or a public organization where the data are all public, there are understandings, explicit, sometimes implicit, about the correct transparency and disclosure involved in using AI. And it's important to work out those understandings carefully within a group and then to operate in accordance with them. Otherwise, there really can be an ethical breach.
Yeah, one thing I've just been kind of thinking about, and I'm sure a lot of people have been thinking about, but just in the context of, using this from an instructor standpoint, there are definitely kind of FERPA type aspects associated with this, right? And I imagine, disclosure of individual students, stuff like that is really an important aspect that we need to be thinking about. Justin, did you have a
Yeah,
comment?
I'm not sure if this falls under the scope of this, but I mean, people do need to be aware that if you, at least in many cases, if you sort of input something into a large language model and a prompt or something like that, that's if it was private information, it no longer is, or it might not be. So it could very well be that inputting information into a large language model will lead to, that will become training data for that, which it could output somewhere else. So this is, if you're a student working on a project and you're interested in pursuing intellectual property protection or something like that, then don't put that into a large language model.
Alex, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because I do educational research, which involves a lot of student data, and I use AI tools to do this. And I guess maybe I just have some practical tips for folks out there. You can host your own large language model on your computer. Even, my MacBook, I can run a 7 billion parameter llama model. Internally, it's not going to be as good. It's not nearly as good as ChatGPT 4, but it's decent for doing a lot of those grammar things and helping change tone in writing. And then there's also various levels of protection within using like OpenAI's ChatGPT. You can go into the settings and say, don't train on my data. Now, I'm sure people have questions over whether that's really what's going to happen or not. But at least it's not going directly into the model, and someone typing at the same exact time will get immediately, responses that you had just put in. You could also use like various paid models. This also brings up equity, I think, concerns that we've been talking a lot about for our students. Those that can buy and pay the monthly fee for these really expensive models might do much better and not get caught cheating or use these models compared to students who are just using the free versions. So, there's challenges and trade-offs, but if you're concerned about student data, if you're concerned about your own data, but you still want to use these models, there are things that are available. And like the 7 billion parameter model is a great alternative to use.
I think one thing too, I would just kind of add as well is I think this maybe fits into kind of AI literacy. As well, because this is something that working as a professional engineer at companies that, right, you're really going to need to know. And like, there's a lot of, IP and that companies want to keep secret and not out there. And so I think they really want this as kind of a part of that literacy too, is like understanding that data comes, they get data from prompts and how to kind of circumvent that or quarantine that. So we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to continue to kind of plow through some questions here. I just wanted to say to the audience, if there are some questions that we don't get a chance to answer, we may send these out or something and try to solicit some answers. I think we're getting through most of them. Let's see. We've kind of talked about I think maybe one thing we could talk a little bit about is institutional policy And I would just like to get a little bit of feedback from everyone at their different institutions. Maybe Justin has an even kind of stronger or a line on this, just because this may be something he's thinking more about. Has there been kind of clear guidance in how to use this with respect to graduate education, undergraduate education? You know, we're going through this. I think everybody's going through this like question of like how much do we leave to the instructor and how much do we kind of control institutionally. So I don't know if anyone has can comment on kind of guidance that they've received at their institution, or is it just kind of like left primarily open to the instructor? Steve, did you want to?
Yeah, just briefly, I would say we're a little bit of both there. The Faculty Senate has begun developing a policy here at Memphis to guide faculty. It does give a lot of leeway to the instructor. It recommends being open to and supportive of AI use in an appropriate way, whatever the instructor feels is. But it also permits the instructor to ban AI use if that's what the instructor wants to do. As far as more sophisticated guidance, I think the Faculty Senate has acknowledged that this needs to be studied, but we haven't done much about it yet. I wouldn't even know that, but I was a proxy senator yesterday for my department. The communication between our Faculty Senate and faculty needs to be improved. And I do feel that I think this is actually urgent, and that if we sleep on this too long, it could be very harmful to the institution and to the students. So I hope we solve these problems, but yeah, we're maybe only at the beginning stages of trying to deal with it.
Justin, did you want to comment on this?
I mean, I think that there are some factors that any good policy should take into account, and I probably won't give an exhaustive list, but so standard plagiarism policies and sort of honor policies still apply. Large language models don't invalidate any of that. There is, what we've been talking about in terms of what happens with it that you input into these, and making sure that you know where that's going, if it's going to be used as training data or not. And then, of course, understanding something about the limitations of these systems in terms of their, the possibility of hallucinations or biases and things like that. And so making clear to students that whatever it is that they write is their responsibility. Those are things that I think any policy would need to account for. But then there's a lot of kind of leeway about things in between.
Yeah, I want to, and I'll get to you, Reem. I was just going to comment really briefly because there's some questions specifically with respect to graduate student kind of work, and we've started to think a lot more about this and essentially doing, with the thesis, with the defense essentially in the prelim, that's kind of an oral in the room assessment, right? And so that's a kind of an easier one to think that can't be, the student can't circumvent kind of demonstration of their ability using AI. I think other things with respect to our qualifier, which we have earlier in the graduate program, there was kind of both a written and an oral component. I think we are leaning a lot more on kind of the oral component to ensure that students are kind of thinking critically and can demonstrate their understanding of the material separate from like an LMM kind of synthesized piece of work. So, Reem, did you have a comment that you wanted?
Yes, so regarding the institutional policy, I'd just like to plug in a work that Professor Worth is actually leading in BME education. Um, uh, we were working together with this just to find what's the impact of AI integration in BME education, and hopefully it's going to be published in BMES education journal soon. But we found that nearly half the universities are actually putting in AI policy. And I think if we do the survey next year, will be maybe 100% of the universities are going to put in a policy for the use of Gen AI.
Well, we are running up on the time. I want to kind of end with an open question. I don't know if this is the greatest question, but I'm going to ask anyway. It's kind of an interesting question, and I've heard it asked in a lot of different contexts. In comparison to other technologies, where would you place kind of the impact of LLMs with respect to education? I think a lot of people have talked about it with, societal impact and, where do we put it with the internet or, you know, transistors or whatever kind of development, where do we place that from a kind of education standpoint? Does anyone want to?
How about the neocortex?
Neocortex.
I'm glad to see laughter. Yeah, that was kind of tongue in cheek.
Greg, did you want to?
So yeah, I would second the neocortex. And I'd also add that I think the impact will be somewhere between significant and possibly revolutionary. We're going to see a lot of different experiments. We're in the early stages of adoption, which means, by the way, that there's a lot of risk involved in using AI in the classroom, but also possibly a lot of upside. But I think we're not really in an epistemic position. We don't know enough to be able to tell this far in advance what will happen even 3, 4, 5 years from now. I'm cautiously optimistic, though, myself.
No thirds on the neocortex. All right. Well, if that's it, then I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. We're really close to time, and I want to make sure that we end on time. As I mentioned before, we'll capture these questions and see if we can potentially get them answered after the fact. Thanks again to Laura and Caitlin for helping out. I want to thank also the Student Affairs Subcommittee who really helped kind of put this together. This was a great idea on their behalf. I'd really like to thank the panelists. I think we had a really kind of diverse group that it was really fun to see kind of the interactions. Hopefully we can do another one of these at some point. I think this discussion is really too broad to like we kind of touched on research, but I think there's a lot with respect to graduate student education we can do, and so maybe we'll have another one that's focused kind of more on graduate student education and research opportunities. So with that, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.